So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Asia Center's 5th Benedict Anderson Roundtable, COVID-19 and Vaccine Nationalism. This event is co-convened with the Thai Media Fund and TDF. And before we start, I'd like to go through some webinar guideline that we normally have before we start the webinar itself. Can you turn on the slides, please? Can you go back? Sorry. Okay. Yep. So the first thing, due to this webinar is on Zoom, we're going to be turning off your. Sorry. Yep. Sorry. Yeah. This webinar is on Zoom. Therefore, participants are placed on mute upon entry, and your videos will be permanently disabled for this webinar, for the connectivities, and for the smoothness of this webinar. Throughout this webinar, participants, please send your question through the chat box and Q&A on Zoom. Please also look out for updates from staff on the chat box. We'll be sending you messages throughout. And at the end of this report, please, we're going to be sending you out surveys, so please fill the form. Also, one more thing before we start, social media actions. Please like and share Asia Center's Facebook page, or if you're watching this through Facebook, please share this live stream to your friends or your networks. Please also look into our LinkedIn and give it a follow. I'm going to pass this to Dr. Robin now. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Klang. So welcome everyone to the speakers, participants, and all of you. Welcome. So once again, as Klang was saying, just said, we are grateful to the Thai Media Fund and to the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for partnering in this webinar on this topic. The topic, as you see there, is COVID-19 and vaccine nationalism. So a very timely topic, I think, I know for sure. So I will come to the program in a second. Let me just say a few introductory remarks. Earlier in our private session with the speakers, James Gomez mentioned the late Professor Benedict Anderson. And of course, Professor Benedict Anderson was a really influential, consequential professor who wrote the famed book, Imagined Communities. And in his memoirs, his final works, he noted that one of the reasons that he wrote this book was to expand the exploration of nationalism beyond European confines, beyond a certain circle of people in London and Oxford and Cambridge and so on, beyond a certain community. And so he engaged in this magisterial work where he invited us to continue exploring nationalism across the world, across geographies. So my first remark here is really, is to note the following, that we are in extraordinary times. We are exploring nationalism in the context not of a war, not of a financial crisis. We are exploring nationalism in the context of a global health pandemic. And are the manifestations, we have to ask ourselves, are the manifestations of nationalism in this context similar or the same to other contexts of war and financial crisis, Great Recession, Great Depression, and so on? So that's my first remark. I think more specifically to today's topic, COVID-19 and vaccine nationalism, I would like to introduce perhaps 4 points that we may think about as we debate, discuss, and so on. One is the race to develop the vaccine itself over the last less than a year or so. The race to develop the vaccine is a matter of great national pride, great prowess for especially big powers, technologically advanced countries who want to show their capacity. So that is one aspect that I would like us to keep in mind. A second very important aspect that was already alluded to is the issue of equity, and humanity. Rich countries can afford it; they are getting the vaccine first, and so on. Poor countries, perhaps the rollout, the access and the rollout is a little bit slower. I echo, or I remind you of the call of Pope Francis recently, a month or two ago, to the world community for the sake of humanity, to make sure that the rollout of the vaccine is equitable and that it is not confined to certain geographies. I also note the call by the WHO, the head of the WHO, who is from Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. And he's also calling for an equitable sharing and calling for the right people, especially in poor countries, to have access to the vaccine, just as the right people should have access to it in the rich developed countries. Why is it he's asking that in rich countries, younger people are getting it first? And in poorer countries, those in need of it in the poorer countries are getting to it late. The third broad point is, and maybe Dechun may have something to say about this, is that the issue of health diplomacy. Now that the vaccines are being rolled out by various powers and countries, some countries, one in particular, is keen on using it for its own health diplomacy in the developing world, increasing its leverage. And the last point I may make is a broader point. I come back to the different kinds of crises. We have seen in the last decade or so, since 2008, over the entire globe, over the past decade, since the financial crisis, there has been an inward turn in many senses. And the coronavirus is the latest pandemic, is the latest manifestation of that. I remind you of, for want of a better word, Trumpism and its consequences, the Brexit and the retreat from Europe, and so on. So I will now turn to our esteemed speakers. With that said, we have a poll ongoing, and so perhaps if my colleagues tell me that it's okay, that it's ready, I can. I'm not sure if you have seen that poll, but we will announce the results soon. All right, so let me turn to the program speakers for today's event. Here is the poll. It has been, the question was, if the vaccine is available, would you take it? And so 94% of those here today said they would take it, 30% said no. Very interesting, okay? So we have in this particular group, we have a good chance of achieving the herd immunity. Very good, thank you all. So you see before you the program. We have Assistant Professor Wisit Tangkeangsirisin, excuse me if I mispronounce your name. Assistant Professor Wisit is head of the Bureau of National Capacity Development at the National Vaccine Institute. Thank you for joining us today. Subsequently, after his 10 minutes, we will have Professor David Moore, an anthropologist from Portland State University. Thereafter, we will have Dechun Zhang, who is a doctoral researcher at Leiden University working on Chinese nationalism. And finally, and certainly not least, our colleague and dear friend, Alexandra Demitrianova, who is a human rights activist, formerly a correspondent in Brussels. So with that said, let me turn the floor over to Assistant Professor Wisit for your remarks.
Hi, good morning, good evening, everybody. Today I would like to thank Asian Center to invite NVI, or National Vaccine Institute Thailand, to join the conference on the topic of COVID-19 and vaccine nationalism. It's my pleasure to share the point of view from Thailand as the National Vaccine Institute. So during the COVID-19 pandemic situation, it's emphasized that the fragility of our healthcare system in our world is very fragile, and it's also emphasized that one country cannot go through this difficulty alone and leave someone or somebody behind. So if you could share my slide on screen, please. I'm not sure.
Moment. Can you, slides coming up?
So, all right. So from the point of view of National Vaccine Institute, we developed the blueprint. What we say is to have the everybody to get access to the vaccine. And I would like to share some Thailand's capabilities in the vaccine value chain. As the NVI, as the focal point on vaccine national policy, we have the capacity on research and development, also the production capacity, quality control and quality assurance, and also the usage of the vaccine. So these four main tasks of National Vaccine Institute, focusing along the path of vaccine developing chain. So at the beginning, we support and build the capacity, national capacity on several technologies and up to the standard of the infrastructure, both in research, development, and the infrastructure to produce the vaccine. And also we have the capacity in vaccine clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 3. And we have the researcher who expert in the broad range along the vaccine value chain. Also the production capacity, we in Thailand has 4 pilot plants, but there is no what's so-called like biosafety level 3 pilot plant, so we cannot perform some other some specific vaccine platform. But still, we need a lot of improvement to build this capacity. And also, we have the production capacity for vaccine and biologic production, and also for the formulation and filling, which is our strength. And also, we have the network and experience on registration vaccine as a country origin. And also, up to the end, the usage of the vaccine is go through the distribution by the healthcare system with the sustainable financial system support and the strong policy to make the decision for new vaccine introduction to the system. So next slide, please. And as I mentioned earlier that since we have the COVID-19 pandemic, as the National Vaccine Institute focal point, so we developed the blueprint to access to COVID-19 vaccine for Thailand as the national strategy. Our vision is to have Thai people have the equitable and fair access to high quality, safe, and effective COVID-19 vaccines. The goal is to reduce the losses of lives and ease the socio-economic impacts. And by this, we need to coordinate a framework for all sectors and reduce the vaccine development cycle times and build the capacity in the long run as well. So the strategic targets is that we have to acquire the high potential candidate vaccine from abroad, since our capacity is not reach the maximum. So at the first point, it is needed to get the high potential vaccine from the abroad for testing in Thailand, plus the get ready for the technology transfer and develop the our own candidates in Thailand. The target is to strengthen the policy coordination and expedite vaccine research and development, and also get prepared to produce vaccine based on the successful vaccine technology and develop the effective M&E model. The next slide, please. So to make you more understandable on how we access the COVID-19 vaccine, we have three main pathway or three main strategy. The first one is to develop the national R&D for COVID-19. Since we have some capacity on developing from the research to the end, right now we have more than 20 candidates vaccine and in 7 platforms in the development process. And this one, it may take a long time, but we still need to go on. It's no later than this year we can get the vaccine from the first part, which is the R&D in our country. But the second part is the way that we get the vaccine much quicker. So this one is the technology transfer for production of COVID-19 vaccine. So in Thailand, we have the agreement to AstraZeneca and some other domestic partner, which is also so-called Siam Bioscience and SCG. So this brings us to have the technology transfer from AstraZeneca Oxford candidate, so what we call the viral vector vaccine, to produce locally in Thailand and have some amount to supply in Thailand, and also the rest of them can be distributed to regional supply. And also I would like to mention that NVI is the focal point of ASEAN vaccine security and self-reliance. So we would be pleasure to take roles even to get the vaccine access to our neighborhood also. And the third one is maybe the major part for the work in this year is to make the advanced market commitment through the facility and through the mechanism what's so-called like COVAX. So we think that we can get from the COVAX facility about 20%. And also in the meantime, for the rest of 30% for Thailand, we would like to get from the bilateral collaboration or agreement with the potential partner, such as the AstraZeneca and Sinovac Corporation and the others also. The main target is to get at least 50% of Thai population to access to COVID-19 vaccine within this year. And later for the next year, we hope that in pathway number 1, which is the vaccine that we doing the research and development in Thailand, could be reach the target to get the registration. And also at that time, we would like to get the vaccine locally, and the vaccine supply would be reached to like 100% for Thailand. So next slide, please. And I would like to go not in details, but I would like to show that like a Team Thailand to get the access of vaccine. We have more than 20 candidates in 7 platforms to do research. But the one that we have the more advanced is the vaccine, mRNA vaccine from Chulalongkorn University. So at this stage, we would like we have the proposed that in April we are going to start a clinical trial phase 1, and by the end of the year we think that we are going to have the capacity on building at least 1 million doses by next year. And thank you for thank you for your attention.
Sorry, Kun Wisit, I was saying thank you for your presentation, and very interesting. Thank you for the outline of Thailand's national strategy. I know you may have to leave us a little bit early, so if I may perhaps throw a question or two at you right now, and in anticipation that you may have to leave a bit early.
Sure.
Your strategy, as you pointed out, involves a significant cooperation dimension. So I wonder if both the COVAX, which has achieved impressive results, and your strategy also includes collaboration with the neighboring countries. So of course, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, they do not have the same capacity as Thailand. You have a very well-developed pharmaceutical sector. So could you elaborate a little bit on, what kind of assistance there may be for Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar coming from Thailand, maybe, and also at the ASEAN level?
I would like to share some point of view. In Asian country, we have several countries in accordingly for the ranking of income of the country. Thailand is classified as the middle or lower middle income country. Actually, from the COVAX facility, which they have the objective to distribute the vaccine, even it's free of charge to low income country. So like Myanmar or Laos or Cambodia, that they have the at least 20% of vaccine to distribute by the COVAX facility. But for the case of Thailand, we classify as the middle income country. That means we have to pay even more than Laos and Myanmar to get the vaccine, the same amount of vaccine. So the situation may be different. That's why we have to be self-reliance. So the strategy, the national strategy is to get the technology transfer from the most potential vaccine that we can do collaborations. The good example is the AstraZeneca. So we have built our capacity enough to get the technology transfer from them. So the rest of those that Siam Bioscience produce, actually we have to send back to AstraZeneca, since Siam Bioscience is the contract is as the CMO, which is the owner rights of every doses of vaccine go back to AstraZeneca. But also we leave the room that the distribution of vaccine to the local region, it's less than they ship overseas. So as the country, the Thailand as the country of producing vaccine from AstraZeneca, so the cost of distribution to the neighbor may be reduced, and we have the some other way, some mechanism to negotiate more and more dose for other countries. So that's why we hope that it is our capacity and self-reliance, and until then we think that we we can help other countries, especially our neighborhood. And I would like to emphasize that not one country can go through this difficulty, but we cannot leave somebody behind. That means the global access to the vaccine is very important, not some specific group or some specific country that to get like 100% vaccine and leave the rest of them. So I would like to share my point of view like this. So the vaccine access to global is the real urgent and the real need for us. Thank you.
So thank you, Wisit. We have a couple questions coming in for you.
Sure.
One is, to what extent does the Thai vaccination plan, to what extent does it depend on how fast the Thai FDA approves vaccines for local use?
Actually, the Thai FDA during the COVID-19 pandemic situation, Thai FDA developed the fast track, what we call fast track or parallel review. So both vaccine from Thailand origin or from abroad submit to Thai FDA for the registration. Thai FDA treat this part as the really urgent need. So they review all the dossier or the registration as the fast track. So it takes not more than two months to get the approval. So you may know from news that at least two brands of vaccine from AstraZeneca and Sinovac are planning to use in Thailand. So Thai FDA are doing dossier review and registration in parallel.
Thank you, Wisit. One interesting question that just came in. Of course, the foreign community, foreign nationalities here in Thailand are concerned about this. Is there any timeline for those foreign nationalities who live and work in Thailand?
Yeah, that is a good question, and this issue also mentioned in the high level of management. So in both cases, Thai citizens who live in other countries or the international population who lives in Thailand. So as the national capacity, I would like to emphasize again that we cannot leave someone behind. That means it's try to find the mechanism of to get access to the vaccine. And as I mentioned earlier, that for the neighbor who come to Thailand to work, even illegally, we treat them as the one who need the care, even we don't have the vaccine right now. So we're trying to find the budget or some mechanism from international level to buy and get the vaccine to the citizen of our neighbor that might migrate to Thailand as well. But at this point, I have no answer yet. But we are trying to get the budget and some support from the from international level.
Thank you very much. And maybe one last question. Could you tell us a little bit about your collaboration with the WHO and what the role the WHO is currently playing in supporting Thailand's efforts?
Yeah, actually, the National Vaccine Institute or NVI get the support from WHO at the very early beginning for the development of the blueprint. We work with the advice and also with the help of WHO to draft the blueprint, and also the WHO has funded the to Thailand to support to building the capacity on Thailand. So we get around 500,000 US dollar funding at the beginning to fund to support the building on capacity, and we use this fund to help our local manufacturer to produce more vaccine and procure some equipment, and we get the help by this fund to hire out the expert international to help us to guide the local manufacturer to develop our own vaccine in Thailand.
Thank you very much, Kun Wisit, for your remarks and your answers to our questions from the panelists, from the audience. We are grateful for you for being here. So without further ado, let me now turn to our second speaker, Dr. David Moore from Portland State University, to make his remarks.
Hey, I spoke at Asia Center just over 4 years ago about Brexit and the rise of Trumpism, to use Robin's term. Actually, it's a common term, unfortunately. Anyway, so I put it in the context of nationalism and Benedict Anderson. And the main point was that there was a continuation of the process of defining the nation state. In Britain, as in the USA, we had numbers of groups that were trying to define what it meant to be British or American. And essentially what does it mean, right? And so let's see here. So we, look at what does it mean to be a good American or a good Thai or a good Brit, right? We had all of these identifications. People continue to work on them. And a good example of this, we can see in historian Heather Cox Richardson's. She talks about how Trump is actually an extreme product of what she calls movement conservatism, something that she traces back through American history throughout, defining through this argument of defining what it means to be an American, right, and part of nationalism. Okay, so Anderson defines the nation state, Benedict Anderson defines the nation state as a cultural artifact of a particular kind, right? And one that has been modular and has been copied all over the world. Each nation state has had to define itself to how best to decide, again, what it means to be a citizen, how to define their identity. What does it mean to be a particular type of person? So in this, we have seen ethnic nationalisms, religious nationalisms, cultural nationalisms. So when I saw the name for our talk today, vaccine nationalism, how do we make sense of vaccine nationalism? Well, one way we can look at this is that vaccines are a commodity, an important commodity, one commodity that all countries, all nation states need at this time. So perhaps it would be better to talk about it as nations and vaccines, or nationalism and vaccines. But anyway, we can see vaccines as part of a much larger economic system that we are all part of, that all nation states are part of, and that essentially helped, and it's these movements of goods and peoples around the world that have helped to define what nation states, or to develop nation states in the first place, as we see in Anderson's work, right? And this is why, one of the reasons why the WHO, COVAX, organizations like this are vitally important. But how do these organizations gain authority in a world system of nation states such as this, right? With all independent nation states. And it's not uncommon to see arguments that, that the end of the nation state is near, right? Because of groups like the UN or the WHO or the movements of refugees, right? It's not uncommon to see these arguments among academics. And again, this is where Anderson's work helps us to make sense of this, and that that nation states exist because of these movements of goods and peoples. Right? They developed in concert with these movements around the world. And he traces out the history of this, of course, in Imagined Communities. And so, right, nation states exist because of these movements, not despite them. Now, it's also quite common to see these views outside of academia. And this is where we come back to people like Donald Trump. So many people have these similar beliefs and views, and therefore they feel that they must protect the nation state from others, right? And we've seen these constantly in the last 4 years in the US, the movement of caravans from the South coming up to invade America, right? The danger comes from outsiders coming in, right? The Muslim ban, right? There's so many different examples of all of this, right? This fear of the outside, the fear that we're going to lose the nation state from outsiders. Now, ironically, many of the organizations that violate national borders the most are the ones that are most favored by nation states, right? And that, of course, would be international corporations, right? These are the ones that are moving the most capital, the most labor, as well as goods, right, back and forth between borders. Yeah, okay, let's see here. So international corporations are the ones that are violating these the borders the most, but they are still seen as being of a particular nation state. Okay, now Trump is just, I would say, an extreme example of this, right? Or Trumpism. Right? Trump, we can look at Trump in many ways as being nationalist, racist, elitist, ignorant of science. All of these things come together in a very bad situation, right? So his withdrawal from the WHO and many other agreements, not trusting allies, etc., is an example of this kind of nationalism. So my hope then is that today, coming up in less than about 9 hours and 20 minutes, let's see here, we will be able to, with a change of leadership in the USA, we can move towards a more more cooperation between nation states and perhaps start to move beyond this sort of vaccine nationalism. But it's going to take time, right? We have a lot of work ahead of us, all of us. And let's see here, as was said in a December Atlantic article, if the virus remains endemic anywhere, it will continue to pose a threat everywhere, echoing a very famous quote from Martin Luther King Jr., of course. And so that is the way that I see vaccine nationalism as a logical outcome of the very system of nation states that we have today. And unfortunately, with the way things are politically, not just in the USA, but in many other countries, it makes it difficult to move forward in a way where nation states can share everything. And hopefully things will change, because I want to travel again as well. All right, thanks.
Very good. Thank you, David. We'll come back, I'm sure, with some questions for you. At the end of this, all panelists' discussions. Let me turn now to Dechun Zhang for his comments, his remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Can I share the screen to my own PowerPoint? I control the PowerPoint by my own self. Share the screen. Is it possible? Yeah. Okay, so hi, my name is Chen Zhang, currently a PhD candidate at Leiden University. I'm glad to join the conference to present the Vaccine Nationalism in China. Now I will briefly introduce in the current stage of China's Vaccine. Well, firstly, there are more than 20 research institutes and enterprises are currently conducting research on developing vaccine in China. On October the 9th, Chinese Foreign Minister spokeswoman Hua Chunying announced that China has formally joined COVAX. There are 10 vaccines on the trials, which are the phase 3, 4 from 3 Chinese companies. So what are those 3 Chinese companies? The first one is the Sinopharm Group. But Sinopharm's vaccine and the bioscience subsidiary it belongs to the China National Biotech Group, which is a state-owned company with 2 vaccine candidates among China's experimental treatment in international phase trials. This company claimed that they could produce 2 billion doses of vaccines per year, which is the largest vaccine COVID-19 vaccine factory in the world. However, this company still not yet published data from its phase 3 trials. The next one is the Sinovac vaccine. Well, unlike the Sinopharm Group, Sinovac vaccine is a private Chinese company. In September 2020, this company claimed that tests were performed on more than 1,000 volunteers, of which some only showed minor fatigue and discomfort, no more than 5%. The same as the Sinopharm Group, that the Sinovac also not yet published data from its phase 3 trials. The last one is the CanSino vaccine, but I more prefer to call it the Chen Wei's vaccine. Medical researcher Major General Chen Wei at the Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, part of the Academy of Military Medical Science, lead the team to develop the vaccine, which include collaboration from government agencies, universities, and the Tianjin-based company CanSino Biologics. This vaccine is the first in the world to be approved for the restricted use in the late of March 2020. However, there are not too many public status on this vaccine, but we could observe the partnership between the PLA and the medical science company at very early earlier stage of the pandemic. So where does those vaccine go? The first one is the Sinovac vaccine. Well, Sinovac vaccine is currently in the phase 3 trials in Brazil, Indonesia, and Turkey, but it also has been approved for the emergency use in high-risk groups in China since July. The vaccine began late-stage trials in Brazil, which has reported the second highest death toll in the world early in October. These trials were briefly halted in November after reported the death of a volunteer, but resumed after the death was found to have no link to the vaccine. 2 weeks earlier, Brazil approved the effective of Sinovac vaccine, reported 78 rate efficiency. The next one is the Sinopharm vaccine. Well, Sinopharm vaccine has been approved for the emergency use in a few countries. The company has been conducting large-stage clinical trials in 10 nations, including Argentina, United Arab Emirates, and Morocco. The United Arab Emirates approved the vaccine developed by Chinese state-owned Sinopharm on October the 9th, reported 86% effective, and the Bahrain follows days later. But Chen Wei's vaccine signed contracts with Russia, Pakistan, Mexico, Argentina, and Chile. So what are the nationalism expression on China's vaccine? In terms of the top-down expression, Chinese CCP highlights the Chinese leading position on developing the vaccine and also focus on the high demand from other developing countries of the Chinese vaccine, which reflect the leading position of China's advanced technology, implies the trustworthy of Chinese advanced technology, and also Chinese mainstream media and CCP highlights the Chinese government's willingness to cooperate with other countries, to help other countries. However, their narrative did not focus on the issues themselves, but more focus on the role what Chinese government play, like Chinese government played a dominant role in the foreign aid. And also there's a strong sense of media bias of the vaccine. Chinese mainstream media on one hand focus on the negative news on European and American vaccine, on the other hand, ignore responding any challenge of Chinese own vaccine. So what are the bottoms up expression? Well, Chinese internet users indeed proud of China's better situation, although China is the first country to find COVID-19 cases after the February 10th. People's life in China started back to normal after the May of January. Basically, after the late of May, people's life in China back to normal, and also they're really proud of the leading position of Chinese vaccine. They believe that China is the best country, not one of, but the best country in the world to control the COVID-19. Although it's not the majority of the internet user, still some internet users challenge the reliability and the validity of Chinese vaccine since this lack of public data. So what are the features of Chinese vaccine nationalism? Well, it shows the feature of superiority of one's country over others, loyalty, and xenophobia, like typical feature of the nationalism. However, in this case, I argue that this sense of xenophobia not only based on the ethical identity, but more likely based on a sense of culturalism. In other words, as long as you abide by Chinese culture, as long as you abide by China's rule, as long as you admit China is in the core in the international systems, then I'm willing to help you. Then you'll be my friend. So, what are the impacts of the vaccine nationalism of China? In terms of the international influence, indeed, China is using vaccine to play the vaccine diplomacy and the soft power games. However, I argue that there's no significant evidence on developing China's international image till now. For instance, Singapore signed an advanced purchase agreement with Sinovac, but still Singapore signed a contract with American and European vaccine companies as well. China's vaccine is now the only sources for the other countries to buy the vaccine. Indeed, to some extent, Chinese leading position, the leading position of Chinese vaccine fueled the vacancy of the America. So what are the domestic influence? At the very earlier stage of the pandemic, what Chinese government hides the information on pandemic, and some scandals happened, such as the death of Dr. Li Wenliang and the Red Coat scandal. People started to distrust toward the Chinese government. The same as the case of COVID-19 vaccine. There's no public data, not much public data on Chinese vaccine, and also on the very early stage on developing vaccine in China, Chinese government even enforced some commoner of the Chinese citizen to take the vaccine to do the propaganda issues, such as the low hierarchy government officers. However, since the situation of China getting better and better, the propaganda news positively framed the Chinese vaccine, and almost 2 weeks earlier, Chinese government announced that all the Chinese citizens will be free to take the vaccine. So since then, more and more people started to trust the Chinese government again. Like some scholars argue that during the pandemic, there's a sign of the biopolitical nationalism, which means that the citizens do not care about what the method of Chinese government use, but as long as you will control the COVID-19, then we will be proud of our country. We will believe that our country and the political system, our government and the political system superiority than other countries' government and political system. So overall, I believe that this sort of vaccine nationalism played a very significant role to stabilize the domestic political environment. Overall, I believe that the leading position of the Chinese vaccine played a more role on the stabilizing domestic political environment than changing the international image of China. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Dechun, for a very interesting presentation, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions for you at the end. Let me turn now to Alexandra Demitrianova for her presentation.
Thank you very much also for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to work with Asia Center and an honor to speak at the Benedict Anderson Memorial Roundtable. I don't really have a presentation, just some supporting stats, but I will share my screen. Give me a second, please. Oh, I can only share one. Okay, I guess you can see this. So I will be, as was suggested, focusing on the European Union or European Union's approach to vaccine nationalism. And firstly, I would actually like to say a few things about the context of the global pandemic. So it's undeniable that, you know, the global pandemic of COVID-19 has hit Europe very, very hard. To put it in simple words, you know, there was great loss of life. The pandemic has also exhausted the healthcare systems and healthcare workers in many member countries. And really, like everywhere else, I would say that the pandemic has exposed the existing inequalities and issues. I would like to share just numbers. I'm not sure if, can you also see the PDF? No. Okay, so I need to share it, sorry. Yeah. This is quite an extensive chart, but on this chart, I just wanted to show you the differences. You know, while there definitely are similar patterns at the level, or, you know, the way that the virus spread through European Union and member countries, the deadliness of the individual waves from country to country really differed. So, for example, you would have countries like France, Italy, or Spain that had really, really harsh and deadly first wave. But then you would have countries like, for example, if I go a little bit lower, like Slovakia, that, you know, ranks a bit lower. Where do we have Slovakia in terms of, you know, number of deaths or the sum of cases? But for example, right now is experiencing a very, very difficult second and third wave of the pandemic, very deadly. Actually, per capita, Slovakia has the highest, or one of the highest, death rate. So that is really the context that we also need to take into consideration, that there are important differences in the EU. Even though we look at EU in the context of COVID as you know, one body, one regional community, there are still very important differences, and much of the, you know, solutions will also will also depend on the individual member states and their local context and decision making. Now, EU has definitely tried, I would say, to mitigate and minimize the damage from the pandemic, you know, whether it comes to trade or travel, but there has definitely been an undenying presence of nationalist measures or nationalism, even pre-vaccine. Of course, you know, to protect population, to support the establishment of trade, of travel, air travel. And this, in the context of European Union, is quite unprecedented. So, you know, the whole community and the economy is based on free movement of goods and people, but also the whole way of life in the European Union is really based on that. You know, you would study in other countries, you would work in other countries, you would have families in other countries. So pandemic has really crashed the way of life within the EU when it comes to free movement in general, whether people or economy. So it really remains to see, you know, we will see what the impact will be in I would say socially, you know, or the social impact of the pandemic and the economic crisis. I expect that the impact will be quite long lasting on the European population. But precisely because of this, I would say that, let me just move over here to my PowerPoint. Yeah, precisely because of that, I would say that, you know, European Union actually very well understands the interconnectedness of the issue. Need for a common solution. Here you can see a chart by Rand Europe. I really like this chart because it already starts with the, you know, with the post-vaccine look at the world, you know, based on who or which countries we will vaccinate, what the, you know, detailed change in GDP will be. And you can see that the EU 27, of course, we have to look at EU as a vaccine a producing community, not a nation, but a community. So, you know, based on this, if we do not vaccinate the whole world, if we just keep the nationalist or, you know, regional approach, this will still have impact in terms of, economic and therefore social losses on us. So the interconnectedness of the world in the pandemic is extremely important. And when I say that they're definitely taking the intra-regional approach to help member states vaccinate their populations and have the access to vaccines. Now, European Commission has produced a vaccine strategy, and basically what it looks like, you might be familiar, EU will negotiate or does negotiate already or has negotiated on behalf of EU member states to secure the production of the vaccines in EU and then supply them to member states. This is done also through advance purchase agreements. So, EU basically buys vaccines that are only to be produced. And also it was very generously funded from the emergency support instrument. 2.7 billion euros went to this pool of ordered vaccines, which then will be distributed to member states based on the population. Now, to date, you may know that European Union has approved 2 vaccines, that is BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna. So these are the vaccines that are already being bought and distributed, and there are more vaccines that EU has struck deals with. Now, this doesn't mean that there hadn't been any, controversies in terms of nationalist tendencies among member states. I will just mention one example, that is Hungary. Hungary is a country which has, I would say, a long-lasting or, quite recent conflict with the European Commission or within the European Union. And you can also see that on the way that they approached vaccine distribution, because right now they are actually planning or already implementing to use some of the Russian and Chinese vaccines. So they completely went another way. So Hungary is an example of a country that is doing its own business and doesn't want to, I think, politically depend on the European Union too much. So this was really, I would say, the maximum of the intra-regional nationalism. The approach that the European Union chose was definitely like the best of regionalism, if we look at it from the intra-EU perspective. So this was very helpful, to member states, but we also have to keep in mind that this is still, in a way, a theory, because we do have this promise of all these vaccines. Some of the vaccines have already arrived and they are being stockpiled. But European Union is not a one single entity in the sense that, each country functions differently. There's different decision-making, different national statistics, and the way that the pandemic has brought very specific consequences. So not all countries are in that same level of readiness for the vaccination process. Some countries member countries still don't have the capacity. So right now, the European Commission has basically announced that they will, or the plan is that by summer, I'm not sure if it's beginning or end of summer, 60% of European Union should be vaccinated. Now that is a very ambitious plan, and just this week, I think European Commission and will give more details on that. But I can assure you that with some countries, from my own perspective, Slovakia is definitely not ready. There is not enough logistics, not enough capacity, and it does happen already that the vaccines we have bought and acquired for ourselves within the EU are being stockpiled and are not being used as soon as we speak, or as soon as they arrive. So this is really the question that you have already mentioned, the fairness, of the vaccine distribution, the need to really fix not only EU's economy, or problem with COVID, but approach it more globally. So it does come a little bit strange that, EU by now has, together with other Western countries, basically bought or booked most vaccines in the world. There is this WHO, World Health Organization-led initiative, COVAX. It's already been mentioned, and although it wasn't proactive in reaction to the fact that EU has basically, acquired all these large amounts of vaccines, it then reacted with the rhetoric against vaccine nationalism, and it contributed really some substantial funds to COVAX. I think European Commission and together with member countries basically contributed 870 million euros. I would hope that it goes up to 1 billion. There are some additional pledges. So, I see COVAX as a very hopeful scheme where European Union can really, contribute more to the fair distribution. But for now, it is only giving money. And we do know that COVAX, if there is one downside to COVAX, then it's definitely the fact that there are not enough vaccines. There might be money pledged to the scheme, but there are no vaccines to both. So this is quite like a double-edged sword. On one hand, European Union is giving money to COVAX. On the other, it is still lobbying bilaterally with the companies who produce vaccines to buy more vaccines. So I think in reaction to this criticism, the EU has very recently pledged to donate 5% of the vaccines already bought or booked to the COVAX, not to the COVAX, but to the low and middle income countries in the global south. And this is, again, a little bit of an issue because COVAX and this 5% pledge of donating the vaccines are competitive schemes. So it's not going to be part of COVAX. So that's also, a little bit politically sensitive. But I think I'm out of my time here. I want to finish up with just saying, just one more stat there. Just finish up by saying that, vaccine nationalism has definitely been present in European Union approach, because at first and foremost, we express solidarity only with ourselves. It was great for the member countries and our local populations to have access to vaccines. But as you have already mentioned, I think there is a need to really globally, first and foremost, vaccinate health workers, first responders, people who are really critically endangered by the spread of the virus and of the pandemic. So I would personally like to see more being done by EU for the fair and very I would say equitable contribution of the vaccines. It's really never too late. And although there has been some international praise for the fact that European Union leads this COVAX money pledge initiative from the developed world, it's still really not enough unless we have enough vaccines globally to vaccinate the really critical groups of population. Then still more needs to be done. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your interesting remarks. Thank you to all the speakers. Now let me turn the floor over to Dr. James Gomez, Regional Director of Asia Center. As per the program that you have seen, Dr. James will be delivering some remarks as a discussant, in reaction to the panelists. James, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. My remarks are very brief, simply to stimulate discussion and also a takeoff point for the other speakers to kind of respond. For me, I found the term vaccine nationalism problematic. It's simply because no matter how much vaccine nationalism you push, you have no choice, because you have to vaccinate other people in your jurisdiction. It's just good PR and you can't avoid it. So one of the things that this whole vaccine thing has exposed is the idea of citizenship. I think the citizenship, there's an assumption, with vaccine nationalism, there's some element of citizenship priority. While it may make sense, maybe intellectually, but practically it's a no-go because it'll be a PR disaster and also a health disaster. So let's look at a couple of spotlights. Let's look at Japan. Let's look at Tokyo. Tokyo has a very sort of, non-legal approach to social distancing, mask wearing, and just, close down to control the spread of the virus. So one of the things they do is they do public announcements, in the streets, through vehicular announcements. There are two languages they use. The first is Japanese, and second is Mandarin. This is just to demonstrate, that you have to go beyond your citizens if you want to kind of deal with the virus. So that's one example. We mentioned Singapore earlier. Singapore has about just under 6 million. The term they use there is residents. Only 3 point something, the lower end of 3 plus, are citizens. The rest are residents and different form of work permit holders, almost all documented. So Singapore has no choice but to roll out free vaccine, voluntary, is a voluntary approach for everyone, because the exposure is to 40 other percent in the city-state. There's also geopolitics. The language given in Singapore, right? They use the betting language. So Singapore say they bet on vaccines. So it's part of their geopolitics to buy Chinese vaccine. But on the ground, I think, the Chinese vaccine is not very popular. So much so, the government has announced a policy where whoever is going or is being rostered to take a vaccine, they will not have choice over which brand of vaccine they can access. So Singapore so far has publicly announced Pfizer, Moderna, and Sinovac. So that gives you a sense of whether this vaccine nationalism, in the practical sense, even is possible. Even in the Thailand case, you have no choice. That you have to. The mention was the undocumented residents in Thailand and workers, but Thailand is also host for retirees, long-term business investors, international students. How are they going to access the vaccine, and who's going to pay for it? So those are interesting views. I'll just end by pointing out two other behaviors that are emerging when we talk about the vaccine. One is the role of private hospitals. In Thailand, news has now broke in the last few days about private hospital already acquiring, up to 1 million doses of vaccine. They're just waiting for FDA approval. Especially the big medical chains, they want to inoculate their workers, the frontline health workers, but also make it available for a fee. So are we poised for some form of vaccine tourism, perhaps? That's one question. You also have an announcement coming out from Malaysia, where Selangor, one of the states, have announced that they may be ready to purchase at the state level the vaccine and to administer it, in a decentralized way. So I think these are, issues that are evolving, and a lot of it is also tied into the delivery mechanism. It depends on how downstream society is organized, and what delivery mechanism do you use on the ground to get to people. So that's just kind of my reaction, and hopefully this would provide an opportunity for the speakers also and audience to respond. I think we have a poll that's coming up now, which says, do you think poorer countries should be supported to get COVID-19 vaccine? Yes or no? It'd be great to hear from you. Over to you, Robin, to manage the time.
Can you unmute, please?
There you go. Thanks, James. I was just saying that you have effectively preempted some of my own comments, so that's always very useful. I invite questions from the audience. While we wait for some questions, I see that in response to the poll, do you think poorer countries should be supported to get COVID-19 vaccines? Of course, 100% of you said yes. So thank you for that expression of solidarity. A couple of questions came in as each of you was speaking, and I noted, let me turn to Dechun. As you were speaking, one comment came in about as the audience member was listening to you, your presentation, the thought that occurred to this person was that, well, it sounds very much a little bit like imperialism. What might be your reaction to that?
Well, I also thought about this question as well, because I think, because if you understand the Chinese nationalism, because this sort of nationalism is, some scholars believe that it's sort of the proudness, because they think that, because this actually relates to this proudness, that we don't want to, it doesn't mean that we actually subjectively wanted to aggressive to another country, but we are sort of celebrate our own battle, celebrate our own self. We're proud of our own self. So I think it's basically relates to the nationalism to some extent. I think because no matter what I mentioned, like the top-down nationalism expression, the bottom-side expression, although they also related to some imperialism, the aggressive to another country, but they also celebrate to their own. Like our country is the best in the world, and also we are the best, and we are controlled. We are as the leading position on developing vaccine. Things like this. So I think it's also related to nationalism as well.
Sure, Dechun, you definitely to nationalism. You also in your discussion, you alluded to the soft power dimension, China's presence in the world, its health diplomacy as an expression of soft power. And it is at that point, I believe, that this comment came in, that it was to this person, it was the term imperialism rather than vaccine nationalism seemed more appropriate. You don't have to respond to that or defend that, but I was curious about your perception of that. Let me turn to another question. This was addressed to all panelists. I'm not sure, since Dr. Wisit has gone, I'm not sure who may be able to answer this, but I will give it a shot. What's the government's strategy to achieve the expected inoculation plan according to the timeline released recently? So that question came in as you were speaking, Dechun, but maybe others could possibly address it.
What I know that right now in China, the government already applied to some Chinese citizens already take the 1C already. Right. In the late of March, basically some voluntary already take the 1C, and for instance, my family members, they are all belong to the work for the CCP, but low hierarchy, they are forced to take the 1C voluntarily. But if you do not take the 1C, you're gonna lose your job. So. Well, they are not say clearly, but you know this. So I'm not sure what's the next plan, but I know that most of the government officers, they also already signed the agreement that they're gonna take the 1C, and my father and also my other family members, they also plan to take the 1C with the few weeks before the February. This is what I know.
Okay. Very good, Dechun. I'll come back to you in a second. I have a question here for Alexandra from someone in the audience. What are you thinking? What are you thinking the EU should the EU at first? Forgive me. What are you thinking? Should the EU at first should help non-EU Europe states, Ukraine, Moldova, Albania, before other states in other parts of the world?
Thank you for that question. Well, I could say yes. Of course, it would be great if EU went beyond the European Union vaccination strategy for the EU members and really also focused on the non-EU members, but its immediate neighbors in Europe, which some of them are, the middle income or rather poorer countries compared to the rest of Europe or European Union member states. But in this sense, I think I would just want to argue really a general sense of fairness of the distribution. It would be really just very useful to see, no matter if you are my neighbor, if we have good trade or other relations, bilaterally or regionally or globally, I would stress the need to vaccinate the most vulnerable groups of people globally. So I would really rather suggest schemes like, whether it's the COVAX platform or other, to really give the vaccines to those that need it the most, to healthcare workers, people on the front line of the fight against COVID, no matter which country. If we're talking about the loss of life or the economic damages that this pandemic brings, then we really have to have the global approach. But Mateusz, in terms of our European community that goes beyond, EU borders, I think yes, there probably should have been some deeper focus on other European countries who cannot benefit from the vaccine strategy and the lobbying of EU only for the member states. I'm not sure I really answered that question.
That's fine, Alexandra. There's a follow-up question for you. And maybe I could draw David into this as well, since you are talking about nation states and vaccines. The question that was addressed to Alexandra and that I could put to both of you is, do you think the common vaccine approach of the EU can benefit the collaboration within the EU as a whole and a positive EU citizen experience? Let's start with Alexandra, and then maybe David, you could chime in here.
I mean, it certainly can. If I understood the question right, it's really about this EU approach, EU intra-regional approach, basically helps the wider European identity, or the right. I would think so. I think Mateusz, not in the questions, but in the comments over here at Zoom chat, he already mentioned that for some member countries, the EU was. Or the EU scheme, the EU lobbying for the vaccines was really, I would say, probably the only chance to acquire vaccines. So for some member states that do not have the capacity or the power status or the economic status, let's say, this was really a major help. So I would say that right now, if I just judge by my own country, I can't really speak for other member states. I would say that the European Union solutions to COVID-19 were, let's say, more inclusive or just had a more positive impact. I think if this pandemic showed us one thing in some EU member countries, that is that we are not prepared to deal with this kind of crisis. So the EU's role was absolutely very, very important, not only because of vaccines, but also for other anti-pandemic measures, and also the huge amount of money that the European Union or the Commission has put through to help member states mitigate the economic damages. So absolutely, I think EU's role is very, very vital, and I hope it adds to the shared European community identity and citizenry. Let's see.
Thank you, Alexandra. David, if I could turn to you on this, similarly, what I heard you saying earlier, it struck me as a kind of a lament. Why are we descending into this deeper and deeper sense of nation statehood, nationalism, when the world is crying out for a more cosmopolitan approach? And as you were speaking about Ben Anderson, I was reminded of Linkletter, Andrew Linkletter, and his idea of cosmopolitanism. So perhaps your quick comments on that.
Well, one of the things that I find really positive, now I don't know a lot about European Union, but we have a group of nation states that are here working together. And one of the reasons why I was against the whole Brexit idea was that, we need to be working together more as nation states. And so that's, I think, one of the very positive things we see out of the EU. Yeah, why are we moving into this more that is the question. You know, why do we have the rise of Trumpism and this sort of nation states moving back into themselves? Because there's this fear of losing this nation state that people don't realize is really, as Benedict Anderson shows us, is a recent creation, right? And they're scared of losing it already, when the reality is, again, that it comes from these very international movements, right?
Thank you, David. Let me turn to another dimension to all of this. There is a question about, as countries are hedging their bets and buying the vaccine from different parts of the world, from multiple sources. This is a question for all panelists, so please feel free anyone to jump in. What will be the geopolitical impact? Do you think the vaccine issue will fundamentally alter existing geopolitical dynamics? So maybe I could start with Dechun.
Well, actually, this is a very controversial question, because I read some papers before. Some scholars believe that it's gonna be change the geopolitics will be more favored to China, because China is controlled quite well in COVID-19, and also the leading position of the COVID-19 vaccine, and also delivered and also offered foreign aid to some developing countries, and to do the propaganda, and the English state media also to do the propaganda. But however, some scholars believe that it's not going to be possible, because according to the Pew Center, they conduct a survey in globally, found actually more and more people from America, from Europe, and they increasingly have the negative image on China, since China's first reaction to the COVID-19, they hide the information on pandemic, things like this. So, but to my understanding, I think it's going to change the geopolitics of China. It will make China become have more voice in the international system, but it will not change the existing international system. But it's gonna be challenge the existing international system. This is my thinking.
Very good, thank you. And maybe I turn to Alexandra as a quote-unquote representative of the European Union.
Well, again, I don't have a direct answer.
Sure.
I think that the situation is developing very fast regarding the pandemic. And I am hopeful, actually, if the world, or I have to say, if the developed world or the global north, because global north is basically responsible, for acquiring most of the vaccines and not really sharing too much with the rest of the world. So if the global north, including European Union, changes its course and really takes this crisis as an opportunity to change the old ways, where I see, very much a post-colonialist kind of, colonialist approach. It's the rich countries first who can buy it, and then the poorer later. So if they change the course, I think this is a great opportunity to just change the whole conversation about public health, about distribution of whether it's vaccines or other goods of public health, and more equally, more equitably between the global north and the global south. So if they change the course, then yes, this could actually change the geopolitical situation in terms of public health specifically, and also economically, I guess. If they don't, then specifically for the EU, European Union likes to portray itself as the soft power. Somewhat they probably want to distinguish themselves from the USA, who often use hard power as well. So the question is, will European Union be continued to see for its soft power if it doesn't change the course and doesn't contribute to distributing the vaccines more fairly? So this is definitely a great opportunity, but the change in the geopolitical situation for the global north and for the EU can actually come out very negative or very positive. I also see from what Dechun was saying that China and also Russia, with their own vaccines development, are racing also for that soft power. So yes, thanks.
Thank you, Alexandra. And on that note, David, a quick reaction. What has this episode done to, if anything, to American soft power?
Well, I just wanted to note that back in March, I did 2 weeks of quarantine in China. And once I finally left the hotel, I could see the hotel from the outside after 2 weeks. There was a sign on the wall that said, virus knows no border. Worst of times brings out the best in people. And so one of the interesting things I find about this whole thing is that how we have a world that is set up on the system of nation states, and that every nation state controls everything that's going on within inside, and it'd be difficult for all of them to cooperate together. But a thing like the virus, right, as it says on the sign, virus knows no border. So we have to somehow rationalize the fiction that we have of these nation states that are separate from each other with a virus that is global and will not play this nationalist game. And somehow we have to put all of this together. And what does it do to US soft power? We'll have to wait the next couple of months to see what actually happens when the US actually starts trying to do something.
Very good. Well, we are running out of time. Let me just acknowledge one more technical question, but at least to get it out, to be fair to the audience member. The question was, I'm not sure we can answer it, but what's the criteria for health agency to assess and apply the vaccines from various foreign producers and with different efficacy, like China's Sinovac, AstraZeneca, and so on? So that is also an issue that comes up. Are proper protocols being followed? Are the full stage three stages of the trial process, are they followed, and so on? And one question which maybe would come to Dechun, but that's perhaps for another time, is why are those 3 sets of data not being publicized for the 3 vaccines that you have mentioned from China? But we can continue that discussion another time. So there's more to be said about this topic. It is, we are almost out of time, so I cannot do justice to all of the points that were made, but let me just wrap up by noting the following points which struck me. David, I noted your, these are my words, but your idea of the descent into the nation state mentality once again, despite some quote unquote progress in the other direction over the last half century or so. Yeah, and that is captured in the term perhaps Trumpism and Brexit and so on. The second point is the need for a more cosmopolitan approach. The need for a more cosmopolitan approach. Excuse me. The need for a more cosmopolitan approach. Going to exactly what you were saying, David, and what James was saying earlier, and I think everyone, is you cannot avoid the other. The other is unavoidable, and if you don't deal with the other, it comes back to haunt you. So we are all interconnected. The EU is a good example of that. I think of the kind of regional cosmopolitanism that is perhaps necessary, and that could perhaps be an example of European soft power and European model of a wider global cosmopolitanism when we deal with such issues. And I come back here to Linkletter's idea of cosmopolitan citizenship. The WHO is a fine example. I think despite its challenges that it has had at every crisis that it has faced. But one could say possibly that it has done fairly well overall. The third point, second last point, is the geopolitics. And, both in terms of the production of the vaccine, the image of those who are making the vaccine, their prestige. And I take Dechun's point about China's move to use or to, let's say, highlight its vaccine prowess and to use aid as a global health diplomacy tool. And the last point I will note is Dr. Wisit's outline of the strategy of Thailand. And in particular, I was pleased to see in his presentation reference to international cooperation, helping the neighbors, and finding solutions to help foreign nationals here in Thailand. So with that said, I think I will wrap it up there. And I think one thing I would like to ask the speakers before we all conclude is to please stay online while other participants exit the discussion. So thank you all again. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to the Thai Media Fund and the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. And we look forward to seeing you all again on future such occasions. I will just refer to my colleagues at the Asia Center in case they may have any last points to add.
Yeah, before we finish, we just sent out a survey monkey on the chat box. So participants, can you please fill it out before you leave? Thank you very much in advance. Thank you.
Very good. James?
Nothing more than just to say that for those of you who are interested in the impact of COVID-19 in Asia and beyond, Asia Center will be hosting its annual conference on the 6th to 8th October in Bangkok in partnership with NIDA, the National Institute for Development Administration. So we welcome expressions of interest, paper presentations, or even organizing panels to partner with us. So please feel free to reach out. The link is now in your chat box, so you can find out more about Asia Center's conference, COVID-19 in Asia, Communication, Nationalism, and Technology. Thank you.
Thank you all. And again, please, panelists, please stay with us.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye to all participants. Thank you.